The year is 2017, and hot off the heels of being the little darling of the Wii U, Splatoon is ready to have a go on Nintendo's newest machine, the Switch. Just 1 year after Splatoon 1's final Splatfest, we already had a full sequel out the door to excite Switch owners. With perfect timing as Splatoon 2 didn't necessarily make the console's launch, but did come out after the first few months, giving everyone who wanted to gobble up Mario Odyssey or Breath of the Wild a chance to do something else, especially when most people trying out Splatoon would be doing so for the first time. It's been a long road, and with Splatoon reaching its 10th anniversary and Splatoon Raiders being announced recently, onto the launch of the Switch 2, I thought it was time to go back a little ways. This is Splatoon 2, 2025. As a quick disclaimer for this video, footage was captured with the Switch 1 version of the game, however the Switch 2 version was played for the sake of checking every box, so should any Switch 2 footage be shown during the production of this video, we will have a small icon on screen for footage tied to the respective system the game is being played on. Now, I adore my share of Squid Kids, and was even there for the day one turf wars on the Wii U, but given just how soon the sequel was released, and now with the inevitable con of charging for online play when it was readily available for free with the first installment, I skipped out on Splatoon 2 back then. At the time of the announcement, my initial expectations was that it was going to be just more of the Wii U game, and what it had already established. But after seeing just how far the envelope was pushed for Splatoon 3, I did get curious what this mystery entry entailed. Booting up the game and being thrusted into a tutorial not unlike the first game, we're introduced to Inkopolis Square. I immediately began to notice the quality of life improvements done later on, as you have to watch the initial Splatcast animations and subsequent announcements when you start your play session, every time. I wish the devs had the foresight back then to make Splatcast skippable like it is in Splatoon 3, but I only assumed they didn't want to make a jump that big at the time given the circumstances. It's a little obnoxious, especially when it's not the game that every Splatoon player is jumping to anymore, but I'll digress. As a quick side note, I also became aware that unlike its sequel, Splatoon 2 doesn't offer cloud saves, meaning as I went on to the Switch 2 version of the game, not only did I have to start over when playing on that device, I had to in turn play through all the respective tutorials all over again. Like other games in the series, you're allowed to freely go from game mode to game mode upon your choosing, with the options being online, local play, story, salmon run, and the various shops. I of course tried checking out online to see how active the community still is, and was happy to see it was relatively easy to find matches. However, it wasn't uncommon to have to wait a good 60 to 80 seconds for players to join. There were of course a couple of instances in which I did have to queue up again, as the pre-match timer would run out due to a lack of a full room occurring. I kept it simple for this video and left it to casual matches as opposed to ranked, but given how it's ultimately not that different, I didn't feel I would be missing anything by skipping out on it. As far as performance and loading goes on the Switch 2 version, I didn't notice any drastic leaps in those fields between playing on both systems, just like I did Splatoon 3. The internet was smooth and never had any issues with disconnection. The maps were also fun to go back and see, realizing which ones were from Splatoon 2 that returned for its sequel, as well as ones that didn't make the cut that relied on little gimmicks. I wouldn't say they made or break the experience, but I wouldn't mind seeing similar ideas like conveyor belts or uninkable vantage points to encourage sniping to return somewhere down the line. With that said, I did find it mildly annoying in hindsight being required to play roughly 2 to 3 hours of online to reach player rank 4 just so I could finally use the different shops in the game to buy equipment. Things like this make sense when a game is new, but going back years later, I wouldn't personally think it'd be too much to ask for a small patch asking players, if this was their first time, solely to skip tutorials or restrictions for new players to ease them into experience. All in all, I do feel like this was largely what I perceived the game to be when it was launched. Ultimately, just more of the same ideas from Splatoon 1 again, just tweaked enough to still feel new, but not too much for the new players who skipped the first game on Wii U. Part of me hopes this game has its niche following when the servers do one day go down, much like Splatoon 1 where dedicated fans take it upon themselves to keep playing despite it all. But I feel like for now anyways, the original seems to be the only game to be able to hold that kind of feat. Now, I love Salmon Run Splatoon 3. I also know the devs knew, by this point, if you were playing the third installment, you already knew what you were doing. So going back to the game that introduced it, I knew to expect a tutorial to an extent, and was sad to find out, even though they aren't long, being required to play more than one of these things before being able to check out online to see if anyone was still using it was part of the game. Like, Splatoon is certainly not an annual series like other shooters. People do in fact stick around after a new game releases, but boy I can feel it sour the waters when having to sit through tutorials you already understood before starting the game, just so that you can check if people are actually playing with other people. I get it. This is something they expect people to only do once, and play the game for years on end that you wouldn't notice, but having to sit through all the tutorials twice, since the game lacked cloud saves, made me realize anyone who wanted to set this game up at a local would definitely have their work cut out for them having to provide all the setups and go through the subsequent tutorials themselves. Even further to my bewilderment, I also became sadly aware that there are just certain times of the day the game mode just isn't even accessible. I tried going back to finish the tutorials so I could actually play the game mode on Switch 2, just for the sake of this video, and I couldn't even do that much because the game wasn't designed to play it at your own leisure 24/7. Splatfest, for instance, I understand. And at the very least, the tease from those events, I found comments online saying it's still possible on occasion to buy the equipment with your in-game currency through the Nintendo Switch app, but I simply don't use that thing enough yet to justify thinking to check it periodically for these items. Only recently have I been using it, just given how the Switch 2 is set up to share screenshots and clips from the system to the app. In any case, Splatoon 3 as a writing at least has Salmon Run designed in a way there's always at least one map or mode you can play casually or privately with friends at any given point in time. I still can't get over that. Just trying to do the tutorials, I walk up to where Salmon Run is in Inkopolis and there's shutters covering it, telling me to come back later. So when I did finally get to play it, matches weren't as common as Turf War, for instance, and after waiting until the next morning to finish the remaining tutorial so I could actually play it, I did find matches in full lobbies in my play sessions for this video. However, there were instances where the matches would remain only myself and whoever else was in the room, without a full stack even needing to be formed. And if you know Salmon Run, it's not ideal to play with less than a group of 4 people. I'm sure it's because I was starting out and the difficulty was based on player rank. However, we still got killed at the last second as I unfortunately became aware that a certain enemy is capable of one-shotting players. It took one of my teammates, my super ran out, and despite being in safety when the super ran out, it warped me back to where I was when I used it, which was right on top of the next ink bomb the enemy had just dropped, and I died myself instantly, so we lost on a fluke. As another quick side note, in playing the game between the Switch 1 and 2 versions, I did notice matches across both game modes were in fact much faster to find a match on the Switch 1 version in particular. I can only assume that unlike Splatoon 3, that makes the experience concurrent between both consoles, Splatoon 2 meanwhile may actually be separating players on this merit alone, which wouldn't be hard to believe with the smaller player base on the Switch 2 yet, and given how the console is only about 2 months old as of writing the script. Moving on, it's now time for the main draw that got me curious about going back to Splatoon 2 in the first place, the single player content. 2 years after the events of Splatoon 1, the great Zapfish of Inkopolis has gone missing, as has Callie of the Squid Sisters. Marie enlists the help of the player, dubbed Agent 4, to help her find the great Zapfish and in turn Callie. I'll do a full plot recap for Splatoon 2 in some detail another time, however the plot is largely similar to Splatoon 1. A Zapfish is missing, the Squid Sisters need the player's help to get it back, DJ Octavio is at the heart of the problem, you save the day, the end. Only this time you add in saving Callie. I would have thought the envelope would have been pushed a little bit further after playing Splatoon 3 story mode, however much like everything else in this game, it turned out to be just more of what Splatoon 1 had established. And admittedly, that's all it really needed to be, as it makes me appreciate what we have now all the more. You have hub world maps to run around and make use of some platforming to reach the levels themselves, as you jump in and gun down enemies and dodge obstacles that you run through collecting eggs, sardines, and scrolls containing lore. Before I get into the sucking scrolls, however, I do want to address the elephant in the room, which are the hub maps, small areas in which you wander around platforming to reach the stages themselves. Splatoon 1 had these, however, they felt very neat and compact, and close together, namely. But not only this, you could tap the stage on the Wii U gamepad to fast travel to a stage after you found it. Meaning, any exploration could be relegated to always looking for the newest thing when you wanted to, but never had to take too long to get back into the action. The problem with Splatoon 2, however, is that these hub maps drastically expand as the game goes on, and they get much more elaborate by the late game. Hampered even further, of course, by the fact that fast traveling these stages was removed for some reason I can't quite figure out. at least until after you finish a stage themselves. Heck, the last hub area in the game, I felt as though I spent just as much time trying to get from stage to stage as I did actually playing the stages themselves, as the final world consists of moving platforms that are hovering over a pit of insta-death that will kill you the moment you touch it, making the entire trek you have to do through that map feel that much more tedious the entire way. Moving on, the sunken scrolls this time around do feel a bit more involved compared to Splatoon 1. Whereas that game was tasked with much more simplistic world building, it's clear Splatoon 2 aimed to be more focused on the immediate cast of characters. Not to say world building wasn't a focal point, however there's definitely a shift to feel a little more personal going through. Speaking of the scrolls, unlike Splatoon 1 or 3, I found them much more difficult to find in this game. I found myself regularly replaying levels multiple times to find them. I feel like this was intentional, of course, as the way you went through levels felt a bit more tedious, with the intent of you would explore every nook and cranny upon revisiting the stage. In Splatoon 1, you had the hero shot, which was your default weapon throughout the story mode. This time around, as you explore the campaign and make progress, you're given more and more weapons as you go. However, on paper, while it sounds neat, it means a lot of levels are glorified tutorials on how each and every weapon works. Not only this, certain levels require you to use specific weapons until you beat them the first time. So say you're really bad with the roller, for instance, you can't opt to use something more suited to your playstyle until after the fact. After a while, I noticed the game does keep track of which weapons you have and have used on certain stages, meaning it's at least straightforward on your personal progress, but it's ultimately not needed to get any additional endings. After being streamlined to use certain ones the whole way through, I didn't exactly feel like it was worth the venture though. On the plus side, the reward for doing so with any one weapon, beating every stage with it, does give you something for the online mode, which no longer being the game everyone flocks to anymore due to there simply being another option with the bulk of modern users, the reward can come off feeling either incredibly lukewarm or very exciting depending on your perspective. That reward of course being a hero version of whichever weapon you took the time to play every level with, being usable in the online mode. The reward truly comes down to what you want for yourself. Personally, I'd have likely found this cool back then and gone out of my way for one or two of these, but now feels more like just finding an extra fry at the bottom of your bag. It's certainly not a bad thing, and I feel pretentious not being enthralled by the idea, just left with more of a reminder of the nature of games with their big appeal being online modes, regardless how much the single player is pushed. The structure of the levels themselves are serviceable, and on the whole, just running through it blind without going out of your way for most content, playtime will come out to roughly double that of its predecessor. Splatoon 1 of course being about 2 to 3 hours long in one sitting, with Splatoon 2's main story mode being about 4 to 6 hours, give or take. After you finish, it's like Splatoon 1 again. Jump back into online and enjoy Splatfest as they come. Splatfest of course not being around for the game anymore, it's more of a casual ride. I will say, one of my expectations I had going into the game's plot, I thought I'd see a lot more of the Off the Hook members showing up and being relevant in some way, given how this is both the game that introduced the duo, as well as certain memes I've seen, comparing them to Deep Cut, saying Deep Cut was cut from their own story in the sequel. Heck, with Splatoon Raiders being announced, saying the Deep Cut characters are going to be the focal point of that game, I was seeing plenty of memes of guys saying, look everybody, they're finally giving them their story after being removed from their own game, when literally the same thing happens to Off the Hook in their own story. Except they're not even relevant. They're just kind of there as Splatcast announcers, and then Callie and Marie are there the entire story mode. What we do get of Off the Hook members are a couple of sunken scrolls that give us small fun facts for both of them. One of them not being very personal on the surface as the other. I doubt this was unintentional, however, given what's probably the coolest thing Splatoon 2 has to offer, that's ultimately was what I really expected to see going in. And that, my friends, is the Octo expansion. Released 11 months after the main game, the Octo expansion is a single-player side story of Agent 8 exploring the Deep Sea Metro, as they had lost their memories and form a truce with Captain Cuttlefish to find Agent 3, as the duo is later accompanied by the Off the Hook members along their journey. Similarly to the main story, I'll make a separate video recapping its plot in detail in the future. However, I'll say right now, this was everything I had wanted as single-player content for Splatoon. Oh my god. A story that focuses on characters, that it's quick to the point and doesn't take too long for you to get into the thick of it, and its challenges are precise and gives lots of variety, the majority of which are absent from the main game, might I add. Challenges can be done back-to-back on specified routes of the metro system as you explore, and as you progress through each of the other lines of the train track, you can of course branch out and play different areas, without needing to do tedious platforming of hub areas or anything of the like to get back where you left off. As you go, you of course get even more lore entries that provide supplementary story material for the characters themselves, and what they've been through, which is a welcome change of pace after two main stories of lore being predominantly consisting of brief snippets of little text explaining why the Inklings love things like turf war so much, or why the local food truck is covered in grease. It's definitely a tonal shift I was looking for that struck me. It feels like they wanted these games to have a little more going for them, so someone shouldn't be the biggest fan of sticking to multiplayer modes. They have a bit more to chew on when the years roll by. The rewards vary for going out of your way and doing every mission the game presents you with in this mode. However, it's far from required of you. As long as you play, progress, and get to very specific spots in the metro system, you acquire what are the 4 Fangs. They'll be given the option to then either progress with the main story of the DLC's plot, or complete challenges that you haven't done for additional lore. As someone who hypes these games up to people more and more exclusively for the single player content, I can't help but make this a part of my selling point to somebody when I'm talking about Splatoon. The entire thing culminates in a lengthy gauntlet run and a couple of fun boss fights that can easily excite anyone that's invested in the colorful world. It's every bit of fan service they could want, all thrown together in a blender. No pun intended. With everything said and done, looking back, would I recommend this game to just anyone? Yeah. Despite my criticisms, I know anyone who genuinely considers going back and playing Splatoon 2 would be someone like myself, who didn't play it in its prime and just want to fill in some gaps here or there. However, while the online modes in there are in their twilight years with Splatoon 3 not only being almost 3 years old as of writing, it's getting a number of updates to run concurrently, between Switch 1 and 2. It's obvious that unless the multiplayer happens to get a cult following, there's large portions of the game that will inevitably be overlooked outside of the single-player campaigns. But when your game is made with single-player content in mind, the level of love and care you put into it will still be something fans of the series can go back to in some way and have fun with, without feeling like they missed out on the main draw of the game. I do hope, at some point, however unrealistic it may be, one day we get a Splatoon Archives type of game that takes all the various single-player modes from the Splatoon trilogy thus far and kind of recompiles it into a game that takes the entire premise of telling those games' events and gives us maybe new levels and weapons, maybe a new boss fight here and there, and keep the overarching plot intact, and that be all it really needs to be. You don't need multiplayer, you don't need to cannibalize your own player base, just a single-player focused Splatoon game that takes all that lore and puts it into a bite-sized package. But that's just my Splatoon pipe dream, of course. This has been Splatoon 2 in 2025. I'm 32X, and thank you for watching.